I don't think Canadians want a second partisan chamber. If you want partisanship and political tactics, the House of Commons is overflowing with that. What we are seeking to be is what the original Founding Fathers suggested the Senate should be, what the Supreme Court, in its reference, described the Senate as a sober second thought, and a deliberative chamber, not a partisan chamber. And that's what we're seeking to develop, and I believe the Senate's on a good course.
Peter Harder, the government representative in the Senate, discussing the role of his chamber on power and politics. People in this country have been debating the role of the Senate since the days before Stephen Harper. Abolish, reform, leave it alone. Well, this week, push came to shove over whether Parliament would have the power to increase the taxes on alcohol by the amount of inflation every year without having to ask Parliament. In the end, the House sent a big message back saying you don't have the right. But the larger issue is the very role of the Senate and how much power they have to buck the wishes of elected officials. That was a hill that apparently the majority of senators were not ready to die on. Let's get to the heart of the matter with our Sunday Scrum. Joining us this week from the nation's capital, freelance columnist Susan Riley. Good morning, Susan. John Ibbotson of the Globe and Mail. Hello, John.
Hey.
And Katie O'Malley of iPolitics. Hi, Katie.
Hello.
Okay, Katie, let's start with you because I know you love the Senate.
I do love the Senate.
The government got what they wanted in the end, but do you think they took the right path?
No, I mean, in general, if you actually talk to most of the senators who even initially voted for the amendment that would have removed this automatic escalator, most of them were sort of resigned to the fact that, well, if the House of Commons rejects our suggestion, it's not the place of the Senate to pick this fight, so we will back down. What really got them sort of disgruntled was this kind of ham-handed way that the government did so, just by sort of inserting one line into an omnibus early adjournment motion saying, and we reject it because you guys don't have the right to do this. Well, the Senate is pretty adamant that it does, in fact, have the right to propose amendments. The question of whether or not they can force them through is another one. But I think it was a fight the government didn't need to pick in this way, so it was kind of a head-scratcher of a way to end off. I mean, it all worked out fine from the government's perspective. The budget went through. It's got royal assent. There's no threat of Parliament being recalled midsummer. But I really do feel like they could have handled it better.
What do you think they should have done?
Well, perhaps had they... See, there's a whole ritual involving this, and if the government is going to advise the House of Commons reject Senate amendments, what they're supposed to do is have the finance minister stand up and say, you know, here is a motion saying that this House reject those amendments, and here are the reasons why. And in that they could outline the claim. The claim the government made was that the Senate didn't have the right to propose these, as it infringed on the House of Commons. What you could have had is had the minister actually stand up and make that case, and then the Senate would have felt like, all right, they have thought about what we're saying. They're putting forward a substantive reason as to why they can't accept it. You know, fair is fair, as opposed to just one line without even an explanation.
John, what do you think?
Well, that's just a whole bunch of chest thumping on both houses' parts, and who cares? What matters is the Senate is evolving into something that is highly desirable, which is an effective Senate. Let's not forget, Stephen Harper tried to repair the execrable reputation of the Senate by putting forward legislation that would have senators elected to limited terms. That didn't work, and the Supreme Court announced you can't change the Senate unless all 10 provinces agree to it, which means the Senate can never, ever change. So anybody who's out there saying abolish it will never happen. Make it elected and effective and equal can never happen. The Senate we've got is the Senate we're going to have for the rest of our lives, and that's all there is to it. So Justin Trudeau said, all right, let's at least make the senators, effective in that I will appoint them on the basis of their merit and have them sit as independents rather than whoever donated the most to the Liberal Party this week gets into the upper house. As a result of this, we have a Senate that is on bill after bill making substantive and considered suggestions for improvements. The House is looking at these improvements, suggestions, and sometimes saying, sure, this is a good idea, let's amend the bill. Sometimes they're saying, no, it's not a good idea, we're going to leave the bill as is. And in all of those cases, the Senate is saying, fine, we defer, we just wanted to point this out. This is a very good way to proceed with legislation and will make, I think, for a better legislative record all around. So I think this has been a very good week for all concerned.
Susan.
Well, unlike Katie, I don't love the Senate, but like John, I agree we're stuck with it, whether we like it or not. And to some extent, the beauty of this kind of
Let me just ask you, why don't you love the Senate?
Because I think it's an overpriced and cumbersome way of making minor legal improvements to bills. So I think they could hire a whole bunch of, eagle-eyed legal clerks and probably get the job done probably more quickly and certainly in less elegant surroundings. So I think it's a waste of time, but we're stuck with it. The beauty of this Senate, though, the new sort of rambunctious Senate, is that if the Senate stops a bill that you don't really like, or sorry, if they interfere in a way that you don't like, you can accuse them of mischief, and I would accuse them of mischief, and notably the Conservative senators on the this attempt to change the taxation for booze and
the excise tax.
The excise tax, yeah. To me, whether they were out of line or not, I just think that was just meddling. It was a populist play on the Conservatives' part to put the government on the spot. But on the other hand, earlier they tried to separate out the infrastructure bank from the budget bill. In that case, I totally supported and agreed with them. So I guess as long as they're playing both sides of the street like this, they'll survive.
But was it meddling though, Susan? Because they were essentially saying that every time you're going to put more, ask the public for more money, you have to ask Parliament. You can't just have it automatically done. They didn't want that set as a precedent.
I don't think it was you may be right, Carol, and that principle may be right. I don't think that had anything to do with why they were doing it. I think the Conservatives were doing it to make the Liberals look like big taxers, and look, they're even going after your booze. They're going to wreck your summer barbecues. I think that really was the motivation. And actually, in terms of even if the tax did escalate each year, I'm not sure that many Canadians would notice, to tell you the truth. Now we'll hear from them if I'm wrong.
Yeah. Okay, in opposing the government's stance that the Senate can't amend money bills, some senators argued that there is a precedent. Here's Conservative Senator Denise Batters.
We've actually amended 2 budget bills, money bills, since the Trudeau government's come into office. One was the very first bill they brought because they actually made a major mistake. They left off a crucial schedule, so we sent that back. The other one was on an issue of provincial jurisdiction. We made an amendment. The House of Commons accepted it, so we do have the ability to do that.
Okay, John, your reaction.
Well, look, the important thing to remember is that by this summer, the independent senators will form a majority in the Senate. So you will have only a minority of Conservative senators. Their ability to mess things up will be limited. In terms of whether the Senate can amend this bill or not amend that bill, this is going to work itself out procedurally over time. What matters is the Senate is sending bills back for improvement or at least reconsideration, and the House is reconsidering and then sending it back. My bigger problem is the Senate remains still very badly weighted. There are far too many senators from Atlantic Canada and far too few senators from Western Canada, just because of the vagaries of when each province entered Confederation and how. Over time, as the Senate becomes more effective and more powerful, that imbalance is going to aggravate people, and there are going to be yet more calls for reform.
Why do you think there's too many Why do you think there's too many from the East Coast? And I'm not speaking as an East Coaster.
Just because when the Maritime provinces especially entered, and Newfoundland too, they were guaranteed a minimum number of senators based on seats. It was just a special deal to get PEI to join, for example. And there it is. It's just as PEI has far too many members of Parliament, so too PEI has too many senators compared to, say, Alberta. So that's going to be a problem over time, and it will worsen over time as the Senate becomes more responsible and effective. But we're stuck with that. Again, just to be a broken record, what matters is, are bills getting better because of the way this new Senate is working? Yes. Oh, by the way, have we had many big scandals in the Senate since this new regime came into place? Except for senators who've been appointed under Stephen Harper, the answer is no. So that's working too.
Okay.
And just to point out, listening to Senator Ballard, she's absolutely correct. The issue here, and this is why it would have been so helpful for the government to actually explain what his objections were, there's a difference between senators amending a money bill to change non-monetary aspects versus either raising or some way altering a levy or adding or reducing the amount that's going to be spent. It may sound like a weird and arcane differentiation, but that's kind of where the line is. The House of Commons is supposed to be the only chamber that can directly impose or reduce a tax, whereas the Senate can adjust other measures, like, for example, splitting off the infrastructure bank. In theory, I think probably would have fallen within their jurisdiction. So I think that Senator Ballard was playing a little bit of semantics there, but, you know, she's also in the opposition. She's currently one of the only parties who actually is in a party that is aligned with the party in the House of Commons, because no one else is, and they are playing the role of opposition, which is also a valid role in our new Senate.
I wonder, you know, Trudeau and much of his cabinet are young, and many of the senators are older, and they've been around, and they maybe see things that they think should be done differently. Is it possible that there's a generation gap here, and that's at least part of the reason that the Senate is being so scrappy with this government?
Well, that's a really good point. Sorry.
I think there's definitely some of that, yeah. I think that's absolutely a factor. I think you also have senators who are, you know, after spending years of kind of defending the very existence of the Senate, they get very uppity at the notion if anyone seems to be taking away their authority. So there's also some kind of lingering judges. Everyone's working to get that relationship back on track, and it's going to take some time. And
there's also that cadre of former Liberal senators who were unceremoniously booted by Trudeau, one of his more inelegant acts, I guess, just in terms of human relations. A lot of them are harboring a certain bitterness and saying, okay, you don't want us to be liberal? Okay, watch us. We're gonna oppose you. So I think there's an element of that in there too. There's a lot of ego at play, which is another reason that I hate the Senate.
You make a really good point, Carol. I mean, I covered Frances Lenkin, for example, in 1995 when she was an NDP cabinet minister in the Bob Rae government. So, and then she went on to work for years in the United Way and other commissions. She brings a tremendous amount of experience to her role in the Senate. And yes, we have a young government with some junior cabinet ministers who had no governing experience at all. We may see over time a dynamic in which older, experienced senators wag their finger at the young pups in the House and give them a lesson on how you properly draft legislation.